When we've just arrived at the Ireland Forum event.
We need to build to buy. Over 40% of housing built in this country is built to rent. My kids are 7 and 10. They won't have a hope in buying a house in Ireland. So we need to shift the housing construction from rental focused over to buying, building to buy.
We also need to withdraw from that aspect of the EU Migration Pact, which enables unelected EU bureaucrats to allocate to us asylum seekers, relocated asylum seekers. We need to follow the footsteps of Denmark and Hungary in that regard. We also need to build appropriate reception detention centres close to entry points in the state to house all applicants and until their application process is complete or until their deportation is finished. This will reduce spending costs on iPass centres and making multi-millionaires out of private landlords. Now, as you know, many of the illegal immigrants are coming across the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and we need to step up checks. We have no checks at the moment. If they can check for red diesel and if they can check for VRT, they can check for illegal immigrants.
We are paying the highest prices in the world for consumer electricity. People say, well, that's not true. Bermuda's more expensive than us. It's not an integrated economy, it's a banking centre, and they have to send diesel in ships to Little Bermuda. That's why it's more expensive. We have to introduce small modular reactors, and this may be controversial for some, but we need to deliver cheap baseload electricity, and the only way for a place like Ireland to do that is with nuclear power, small modular reactors. And then tidal. We have this thing in Ireland, because of where we are in terms of the latitude, this piston that goes up and down every 6 hours. It's called the tide, and it's predictable. Unlike the wind, we know exactly when it's going to go up and when it's going to come down. And that piston is exercising trillions upon trillions of kilojoules of energy 24 hours a day around our coast. We have massive tidal fluctuations in Ireland, some of the best in the world. That's what we need to be harnessing. Chinese solar plants out, absolutely destroying our country. Stupid windmills destroying our ecology, out. If we want renewables, tidal is the way to use.
And if a nation is to be sovereign and free, it must police its own border, especially against people coming in through the UK from God knows where. I have never been able to get on or off a plane without a passport. If you arrive at Dublin Airport or in the ferry ports without a passport, back on the plane you came off.
How do you deal with the fertility rate collapse? How do we rebuild the native population in the discussion we're having? Can you respond to that comment?
This question for me?
Yeah.
Well, as you know, abortions are running at the rate of 10,000 a year, which is very unfortunate. I really don't know what we can do about that, because the law is the law in that regard, and people have a choice. But I think it's very sad and very unfortunate. And those abortion rates really relate to our own native white population, whereas we have an expanding population, immigrant population coming in, and many of them don't believe in abortion, so they are going to obviously increase the rate of children that they have here. And just as in the UK, where it's anticipated in 10 years British people will be a minority in their own country, if we keep going at this rate, we too will be a minority in our own country. It's inevitable, because what happens in the UK usually happens here. And one of the things that I just wanted to say, following on from what Declan and Malachy had said, was that we need an urgent review of the critical skills and the general employment permit situation that's being operated by this government, because in 2024 alone we had 38,189 employment permits issued, a 24% rise from 2023. Now, I do appreciate we do need some workers, so I'm not saying we shouldn't have any, but one of the issues that we need to bear in mind is that somebody comes in in the critical skills category, they have a right of family reunification. So you can see how the numbers are going to increase exponentially year on year and year. And there's nothing to stop this. And what we need to remember is that all of this is driven by an ideology. You just have to go onto the government website and look at their 2040 project. Their plan is to have 8 million people in Ireland, north and south, by 2030, and 10 million people north and south by 2050. This is a fact. So whether it's illegal immigration or legal immigration, there is an ideology of this government behind it. So the solution to that, Eddie, is very simple. We need a new government with a new ideology. We need a government of patriots, not a government of globalists.
So when we're talking about upholding the Constitution or constitutional rights, they're God-given rights, they're natural rights that you have by virtue of being alive. So a politician can't take them away if you fundamentally believe that. That's the first thing that I would say. But I think with Jim O'Callaghan, I think he's very, very shrewd, I think he's very clever, and I think he's going to be a lot more difficult to defeat than it would be with Helen McEntee. He's not going to walk down the road in Dublin with 2 guards either side saying Ireland is a very safe country. What I would like to talk about as well is in relation to introducing, I suppose, knowledge and education to people as a solution, and then also mass resistance, and then also people building a parallel society, parallel lives and self-sufficiency. So if you don't understand even the magnitude of the laws being brought in, or what the laws are, or understand them in layman's terms, you're never going to be able to defeat the government or even know what they're talking about, because I think we see it every day of the week, and especially during COVID. The number of laws that they brought in during COVID, which were in the hundreds, if you can't understand the laws, how can you find the loopholes in them? Like, there were plenty of people, I think, throughout COVID that were able to go into shops and explain to the person in the shop, I have a reasonable excuse, this is the piece of legislation, the loophole in the legislation that allows me to go in here without wearing a face mask. But we need to educate people, number one, on what the law is and break it down in layman's terms so that they can actually understand it. But then, in addition to that, we need to explain to people why freedom is important. And this is something, I suppose, that we were discussing at home, that I was discussing at home with my partner. And it was one of the things that he had been saying to me there recently, is that there's a lot of people out there who want freedom from freedom. People need to understand why freedom is valuable and why it's a precious commodity that when you give it up, it's very, very hard to get it back. And that's all around an education part for people, because there are an awful lot, there's a cohort of the population who want to be told what to do. So at least if we educate people on the laws that are coming down, break it down in a way that they can understand, and then educate them on why freedom is so important, maybe we'll stand some chance. And then I suppose the second thing that I mentioned was just in relation to mass resistance. And sometimes when people think of mass resistance, they think of, big acts of mass resistance. It doesn't have to be. It can be something as simple as talking in the corner shop to somebody about something that you heard, and just a little nugget of information. And an awful lot of the time you find that when you drop something into the conversation, they think the exact same thing that you do. And that's how you bring people along. And then another thing is something as simple as using cash. Using cash all the time. Make sure that the shops that you're going to know that they need to keep that avenue open. And then the final thing I mentioned then is just in relation to parallel societies, being self-sufficient. Even something as simple as learning to grow your own food, that you have that ability and you have that knowledge. So just very, very quickly then in relation to some of the laws. So we all know obviously that in 2024 they introduced the Hate Offences Act. That was the hate crime element, and they wanted to introduce hate speech and hate crime. And when they just introduced the hate crime element of it, there was a big applause from everybody. The hate speech didn't go through. The problem is that there are a lot of direct and indirect attacks on freedom of expression. So while the hate speech element of the bill didn't go through, there are certain aspects of the hate crime law that did bring hate speech in through the back door. But then there are other pieces of legislation like the Harmful Communications Act that they brought in on 28th of December 2020, which is an egregious piece of legislation. So that was, and this is what they do, they bring things in instead. So that legislation was primarily designed to criminalise the non-consensual publication of images. So revenge porn, something that nobody would be in favour of. But what they did as part of that legislation in Section 4, they introduced a new concept of criminalising grossly offensive communications. And there has actually been a publication out there at the end of 2024 to say that there have been over 200 over 200 prosecutions on that piece of legislation since that time. Do you need to look at the direct and the indirect?